Well, welcome everyone to the wonderful world of visitor use management. Very exciting topic, particularly for these times. Before we begin, I wanted to just note that we use the word visitor use interchangeably with recreation use. Neither of those words is really ideal. A lot of people do not consider themselves visitors, and recreation oftentimes can be seen as more of a consumptive kind of a thing rather than a really enriching experience. So just bear in mind that as we use those words, that we are trying to be really broad and inclusive in using that. So anyways, a little bit about where I'm coming from to get us started is I started out as a volunteer in 1979 in the backcountry. And during the 80s, it seemed like most of my job was moving rocks around and being a backcountry janitor, moving rocks to get rid of fire rings, moving rocks to try to fix trails and things like that. Started kind of questioning, am I really being effective? And am I the only one that thinks that some of these things are problems? What protections are really in place long-term to address some of this stuff? And could we be doing more to prevent the problem from occurring in the first place? So in the 80s, I had the chance and the good fortune to hook up with Dr. David Cole, who was doing a lot of the writing at the time about the effects of recreation use in wildland settings. And it was one of the folks that was instrumental in developing the limits of acceptable change system for trying to address wilderness effects or recreation effects on wilderness. And so I spent quite a bit of time working to apply the LAC process, and at the same time working with what was then called transactive planning, which basically meant really engaging and working with citizens in a very focused way. Along the way, as we went through this evolution, I was still a seasonal when I was starting to work with this stuff, and I made a ton of mistakes, learned a lot through the process, and I'm hoping that through this presentation that I can share some of what we've learned over the last couple of decades of working with these concepts. So we wanted to start with a poll with the audience that we have here is, where are you coming from? So Jimmy or Dan, if you could pop up the poll question, that would be great.
You bet. Dan?
Hey, Jimmy, it's not letting me because there's someone else is logged into the account.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll.
Thanks.
And I like the idea of setting a target like they did on the other session. We have around 80 people here. We could get up to maybe 50 responses. That would be great. If we get over 50, we know we have a group of high achievers.
Interesting.
Almost there. I'll give you another 10 seconds here. Okay, I'm gonna share the results with everyone.
Okay, it looks like this is great. It looks like we have a pretty good balance of people, but mostly folks that are honestly a little bit where I was coming from at the beginning of my career in seeing some of the issues out there, but not really quite sure how to do that, or how to begin addressing that. So that I'm hoping that this session today will give you some ideas of how to get started. So thanks for that. We'll go ahead and close that. So what are we trying to do with visitor use management? I think that all of us can agree that we have a common goal of we want to connect people to the outdoors, likely by being in this field and being involved in wilderness or wild and scenic rivers, or just working with recreation use. You probably love being in the outdoors and love the open spaces that we have available. And we want to try to connect people to these lands. But this access really does need to be well managed if we're going to preserve the qualities that people care about and what these areas have to offer us. Outdoor spaces are clearly more important than ever. There's a few trends that are definitely affecting visitor use management right now. And I think that there's a lot that we could talk about here, but I just want to highlight a few things. There's no question that there's a lot more people and oftentimes less experienced visitors that are coming to our areas. We're seeing more resource and social impacts. We're seeing a lot new technology and trying to figure out what's appropriate. How do we respond to some of the new technologies that are coming along? And at the same time, we're struggling often with less funding and certainly less workforce capacity. But it isn't all bad news. One of the things that we're seeing really clearly is that outdoor experiences are becoming highly valued. In many ways, we've come full circle, where for a while, there was actually a little bit of a downturn in people wanting to be out in the outdoors. And now we're seeing a huge resurgence of that. And more people really want to be engaged and help in meaningful ways. This does mean that there's potential for increased public land support. And also, interestingly, there is more desire for reservations. So some of the tools that were actively not supported in the past are starting to become more acceptable. And overall, it does seem like this is our moment to try to address some of these challenges. People are seeing some of the issues, they want to help, and there's opportunities to connect with folks. So what do we know about some of the new folks that are coming to these spaces? Is a few findings from some of the recent studies is that obviously things that are fairly close to home and road trips were much more popular in the past year due to the pandemic. Also, activities that have kind of a low barrier to entry, things like walking, running, hiking, biking, seem to be the things that were increasing the most. And then interestingly, this past year, and I'm sure all of us can relate to this, is there's just a bit of screen fatigue, where having real experiences and feeling connected to other people and to places is becoming more important. The new participants also tend to be slightly more are female, mostly younger, and slightly more ethnically diverse, and more likely to live in an urban area. And some of the findings also suggest that people are looking for information on where to go, how to participate. They just aren't really sure what that is. Some of the challenges that we're faced with. We're seeing more and more of these kinds of headlines all across our different areas, and challenges with trying to deal with some of the issues that are coming up as we see this resurgence in use. So this is going to be a challenge, a little bit of a challenge, but we're going to try to see if we can generate a word cloud with some of the challenges that you're seeing. And so what I'm going to ask you is to take your phone and go to www.menti.com, and there's going to be a screen that shows a code that you just punch in, and you can add 1 or 2 words that show the top impact that you're dealing with in your area, or the issue that you're seeing. And so I think what I need to do is so this should come up on your screen. Is everyone seeing that?
We can see, name your top visitor use impact in 1 to 2 words.
Okay. And so there's a code here on the top, 6137-8987. So I can see some people are getting this already. So go ahead and take a few minutes and type in 1 or 2 words that relate the impacts that you're seeing. Huh. Oh, okay, good. Huh. Some really good stuff coming up here. Okay, clearly human waste, poop, trash, those are coming out as some biggies for many people. Things, but I also really appreciate the variety of things that folks are addressing. Expanding campsites, new user-created trails, issues associated with trail braiding, increasingly crowded conditions. So thank you very much for that. I think we'll stop that. This will be saved, and we can share it with you later. So Jimmy, are you now seeing the PowerPoint?
No, I can see you and I at this point.
Okay. So give us a minute to.
Hey, thanks to folks for sharing the code in the chat box there. The group effort here is very much appreciated.
Yep. It's always interesting to see if we can make the technology work. Are you seeing the PowerPoint now?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks for all of that, and we'll be going back to some of those recreation effects that you mentioned as we go through this. So what is visitor use management? This is the formal definition that's been adopted by the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council, which represents 6 federal agencies that all have a lot of responsibilities around visitor use. And key words here is that we want to emphasize. It's proactive, trying to get on some of these topics early and not waiting until things are totally out of control is important. We do manage the characteristics of visitor use, which we'll go into a bit more. And then also the natural and managerial setting. We use a variety of strategies and tools, not just one tool. And ultimately, our aim is to achieve desired resource conditions and visitor experiences. And those things are what we're trying to achieve is to preserve wilderness character, whatever that means for your individual area, or to protect and enhance the outstandingly remarkable values of a river, a wild and scenic river, or protect the special qualities that exist for a particular place. So what are these characteristics of visitor use? This comes from the decades of research on what influences the amount of impact that happens on the ground. And what we find from those studies is that, of course, the amount of use has some effect, but the degree of impact also relates to the timing of use. For instance, the winter season is much, much more stressful on wildlife than the summer season. And so there's more of an effect from recreation in the winter than there is in the summer. Likewise, I think we can all relate that in the spring, when trails are just melting out, and soils are wet, they're much more easily damaged than in the middle of the summer when they're dry. The location or distribution of use plays a big factor. We know that some locations like riparian corridors are more sensitive, are more important for wildlife, and then can be more easily disturbed by recreation. Likewise, a poorly located trail is much, much more easily damaged than a well-placed, sustainable trail. The type of use plays a role. We've all seen where really, really large groups can have more of an effect than a smaller group, or dogs can have more of an effect than someone just hiking alone. So the type of use matters. And then a really key one is the behavior of the visitors. And this plays a big role, and trying to understand the kinds, where does that undesirable behavior come in? Is it careless behavior? Is it just unskilled? Is it uninformed? Is it an unavoidable effect? Or is it truly, and by illegal, meaning that a person really does understand what the rules are, but chooses to ignore those? So there's all those categories that we have to understand where people are coming from in order to solve some of these issues. So as we dive into the concepts around visitor use management, there's a couple of key points. The first is that we really need to erase the word capacity as a shorthand when we're really talking about is good visitor use management. Capacity is just one component of that. And what we find is that if we just focus on capacity, we're too narrow, because that's only dealing with the amount of use. It's not addressing those other characteristics that we care about. So what do we mean by good visitor use management? It really requires 3 very clear things. We need to know what we're trying to achieve in the long run. We need to know we have to have some understanding of how visitor use is influencing what we're trying to protect. And there has to be a commitment to active management and monitoring. And all of this is embedded within the existing laws that pertain to that area, a sliding scale analysis, and lots of good public engagement. So a few principles that we're going to touch on here is that all recreation use causes some degree of impact. The difficulty that we run into is that that effect is cumulative. And so it is hard for just one individual to say that, think that they're having much of an effect, because it really is the thousands of people that are all recreating in that same space that results in the effect that can become undesirable and things. But all recreation use causes impact. It's really important to try to get away from people just pointing fingers at it's those other guys that are causing problems, not me. And then it's also important to realize that change is inevitable. We can't keep things exactly the way they are. And the past is clearly not our future. Another important point is that not all areas should have the same emphasis. Is the concept of zoning has been around for a long time. It's one way that we can use to provide more choice, because it's clear we don't all want the same kind of experience. And so by providing that spectrum, we give more choices of what the options are. And the challenge is to match what people are looking for in an experience with where is that setting that can provide that experience. It's increasingly clear we've got to be proactive. If it's almost impossible to turn things around once a pattern of use has become established. We can do it, but it's much harder. And we know from lots of experience that to make change and be effective, there has to be really strong relationships in place. This is all about being able to talk about trade-offs. With every action, there's some pros and cons, and we need to be able to talk about what are the pros of a particular action, what are the potential negatives, and be able to articulate what is the best choice at this moment in time, and keep adapting over time. And to adapt, we need to really commit to implementation and monitoring. So we're going to touch on each of these four elements. The visitor use management framework is nothing real new. It's based on all of those decades of looking at recreation effects in wildland settings and how we structure a process. And so the four key elements are to build the foundation, to find the direction that we want to go, identify the management strategies, implement, monitor, and adjust. Again, nothing new, but it's a way of really structuring an effective process to address these challenges. So to start, what I've tried to do is boil down each of these elements into what are the key questions that you need to ask at each stage of this. This kind of framework can be used whether you're dealing with a site-specific problem or you're dealing with a really large-scale visitor use plan for a large region and things. You can still go through these same kinds of questions. So the first is, what is the problem or the opportunity? Why do we need to do something, and what's the evidence? And we're going to be talking a lot more about this, because this is something that is just crucially important to really spend some time on understanding the problem. And then secondly, might seem intuitive, but what direction already exists? Is there a law that is governing that particular area? Is there already some kind of management direction in place? And it may be, it's not going to tell you exactly what to do, but it gives you some guidance on what's important to protect in that area. And then third question is, how much do you want to take on? What's the geographic scope of the project? How many issues are you going to try to take on all at once? And this diagram that is below here, we call the planning corral, is that there's always, it's a great negotiating tool, is if you were leading a particular project, your line officer or decision maker can say that 2 of these things are fixed, but they can't fix all 3 in time. And what I mean by that is if they want the project done within like 1 year and you've only got your existing staff, then the amount that you can take on in the project scope is going to necessarily need to be somewhat limited. Or you may have a particular project scope that really needs to be taken on, and existing staff, and then that determines that maybe you're going to need a little bit more time to really solve that. So use that to your advantage to help balance how much you're taking on. And then to understand how much investment is needed, we really encourage the use of the sliding scale of analysis, where you're looking at how much uncertainty is there around the issue. What's the risk of the impacts? Is it a really vulnerable resource? Is it a particularly rare species that you're working with? How much do stakeholders or the public really want to be involved in this? And what's the level of controversy? And by considering these kinds of things, you can help determine whether your project is going to require a high level investment, a moderate, or a low. And so what comes out of answering these 4 questions is a really clear purpose and need and a project strategy. So again, as I mentioned, understanding the problem, this is something that we haven't particularly done well in the past. And it's absolutely crucial, is spend the time to really dive in and understand what's the specific issue. We have a tendency to say, well, there's just too many people out there. Well, okay, there's too many people, but what is the effect that that's causing? Why is it an issue? For who is it an issue? And really try to understand what's driving. Is it related to the amount of use, the timing of use? If it's a behavior issue, what's driving that visitor behavior? And what's the consequence if we don't take action now? And I have found this to be really, really helpful, is constantly sell the problem, not the solution. Is if people don't believe that there's a problem we're solving, then no solution that you offer is going to be acceptable. And when things get tough and controversy starts erupting over some particular course of action, it's always helpful to go back and say, okay, here was the problem we were trying to solve. We still agree this is a problem that we really need to take on. If this action isn't acceptable, then what can we do to still resolve the problem? So it's a really helpful thing to keep coming back to, and create a story around why this matters. So we're going to have one more quick poll here, and I'll ask Dan to bring that up. Is the impact that you named earlier, what do you think is the primary visitor characteristic that impact relates to? So can you bring up the poll, Dan? Or
Hey,
Jimmy?
this is Jimmy. I'm working on it.
I can, you
And
want me to try?
no, we're there.
There we are.
Thanks for
Yay.
bearing with me.
Okay. So again, we talked about the 5 different factors. Looks like people are getting it.
All right, we're up to 95 people, so we should get around 70, hopefully,
Excellent.
if not more. All right, I'm gonna give you 10 more seconds and then I'll close the poll. Okay, I'll close
Hey.
it now.
That's great. I'm really pleased to see that people, behavior of visitors really is oftentimes a key factor. So I'm pleased to see that that's coming out strongly. But again, oftentimes some of the issues that we're dealing with may relate to a couple of these factors, but there's an underlying one that is most prevalent. So you can see that if your issue is related to the location or distribution of use, that's going to suggest a different kinds of management action than if it was related to the type of use. Thanks. So thank you very, very much for those responses. It's great to see. That's the kind of thinking that we're trying to encourage as you work through this. So the next element is answering the question, what? With that first element, building the foundation, we're trying to ask, why are we doing this in the first place? Now we're trying to ask, what are we trying to achieve here? And so the 3 key questions that are really important to ask is, what are we trying to achieve? What does success look like? And you can do this for just a particular project area. I'm dealing right now with a situation where we are dealing with just a huge increase in dispersed camping right adjacent to a national park. And the park is all now 100% reservation, so people can't get into a campsite, so they want to come to the national forest. And so we have talked through, what does success look like? And have identified things in terms of how do we know if we're making progress? Are we seeing less unattended campfires than we are currently? We're trying to achieve making sure that people aren't leaving their campfires burning. We're trying to achieve that people are checking ahead before they try to go out and find a campsite when they're probably all full. So, talking through what are you really trying to achieve? And that can be just listed as the goals for the project, or even in an incident management plan, what are the objectives that you're trying to reach? And things. And so I think it's the first 2 questions that are most critical. If the third question is, how much change is acceptable? That's a harder question. And if you can't get there right off the bat, at least if you know what metrics you're tracking, you might be able to go back later and say, okay, how much change really is acceptable here? And the outcome is some kind of vision of what you're trying to achieve here. So the next element is starting to craft your management strategies and answering the question of how are you going to do this? So what's the gap between your existing conditions and where you want to be in the future? What actions could be implemented? And what are the trade-offs associated with a different action? And then if necessary, if the issue is really related to the amount of use, do you need to establish some kind of a capacity? So oftentimes the right actions is going to be a suite or a package of different things. It isn't usually just one action and things. And so in choosing the different actions, you want to be looking at what's going to be really effective, what is going to be feasible to implement, both from a capacity standpoint and a technical standpoint, as well as politically. Is it feasible to do this and actually have it be successful politically? If not, what can we do to change that political dynamic? Is there a cost to visitors? Is there a commitment to move forward? And have we considered potential unintended effects? Are we just moving the problem somewhere else and things? So that's, as you're thinking through what actions to choose, really talk through those different trade-offs. One of the little mantras that we use oftentimes with our field staff, whenever we're working on a particular issue, it's what's the plan and who's in charge and things. And that's become kind of a nice little mantra of, okay, what are we actually going to do here? Who is responsible? Who's in charge? And I wanted to just talk a little bit about, because behavior of visitors comes up so much, and we also know that many of our visitors are new, is that we really need to go back to some basics and really work much more aggressively on education campaigns and try to influence some of the visitor behavior, and particularly if this is related to actions that are coming from just not having the skills. People may not have grown up learning how to be in the outdoors. I know last summer we encountered many visitors who had just bought a tent and honestly didn't know how to set it up. And so we needed to work and help people have a good experience by helping them be successful and learning the skills. During the solar eclipse in 2017, many of our wilderness rangers were encountering folks that were in the wilderness and never had been in a wilderness before and didn't know how to hang their food in bear country. And so they carried extra P-cord with them and helped people hang their food and everything, so that they started to develop those skills. And this also education is also very useful if people are just not informed or they're not prepared and things. And it's a great place to work with partners and really thinking through, what we say, how we say it, and who the messenger is, depending on what kind of audience we're trying to reach. So I was going to play just a little. We had a project in working with some partners this past year of using little videos to try to encourage responsible recreation. And these were all sponsored by partners. So this is just a little short social media clip that I'll play.
I don't think we were getting the volume on that.
Okay. Let me see if I can. Yeah, you know what? I think I'm going to have to. I think I have to go back and reshare the video in a different way. Is what we can do is add this in later. But the main point is increasingly, as we look at some of these education tactics, using short little films can be a really effective way to tell a story. The thing that we tried to do with these videos is it wasn't coming from necessarily an agency person. It was coming from people in the community talking about why they love this place and why they wanted to give back to the community. And so it's that idea of sharing that being responsible is coming from a place of love and doing it that way. And this was all partners sharing these messages, not just the agency. So anyways, I just would encourage that as a practice that can be really helpful. So in this, what I'd like is if you could share something in the chat or raise your hand and we will unmute you, is identify one action that you think would improve the situation for one of the impacts that you suggested earlier. Again, there's all these different kinds of strategies that we can use. We can modify the type of use. We can try to modify visitor behavior. We can modify visitor expectations, the timing of use, the location of use. And in general, the actions that we tend to employ fall around one of the three E's plus evaluation, but some kind of education efforts, some kind of engineering options, which basically is talking about site design, either doing something to redesign a facility or relocate a trail or harden a site so that it can handle more use, or put up barriers to discourage use someplace and encourage use somewhere else, and enforcement. So if you can, throw something in the chat that will give some ideas of what are the kinds of actions you've used that seem to be successful. Or you can raise your hand. And Jimmy, if you can read some of the things that are coming up in chat for everyone, that would be helpful.
You bet, Linda. When you said raise your hand, I was looking to see if folks wanted to speak, but some of the comments are encourage visitors to visit less popular areas through providing information about those places. Modify visitor expectations, close camping to high impact areas, close user trails and braiding, open some user trails for system trails. education before people get to the trails as well as on the trail. These are good stuff. Designated campsites, provided resources are available to provide adaptive management, reduce quotas, educate, set up tabling, leave no trace, encourage visitors to value resources. Still have a few more coming in, so I'll keep going. Educate people about impacts of social trails while rehabilitating damaged areas, especially close to the trailhead.
Okay, great. So, yeah, some of the things that, oh, go ahead.
Just one more and I'll stop. Managing online crowdsourced information on hiking. And then other things are coming in, but those are all great suggestions.
Okay, so I'll share a couple things that, you know, with the dispersed camping situation that I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we did, which is becoming increasingly used as a tactic, is designated dispersed sites. And so it's still dispersed, undeveloped camping, but instead of being able to camp anywhere, you have to camp at a marked site, or you have to park your vehicle at a marked site. And that allows us to manage the use a little more intensely. And it does help limit just that continual growth of campsites. So it's been a fairly effective strategy. Also, in terms of managing visitor expectations, is that, you know, there's different phases of a person's trip. Is, you know, people have that anticipation phase where they're starting to plan for a trip or thinking about going out for a weekend. And so you want to be able to get information to them so that they're preparing in advance of being on site. And so we've been really partnering with our local Chamber of Commerce and Travel and Tourism Board to have a very consistent message that, because of the popularity of some of our camping areas, is people really need to plan ahead. And do you know where you're going to sleep tonight? And if you don't, you need to check ahead and things, because things can be full. So really getting that message out with partners is really useful. Another example is that I think we were seeing quite a bit of illegal mountain biking use occurring in one of our wildernesses. And so we did use that strategy of developing trails outside of the wilderness and really put a lot of effort into creating a really nice trail system that was closer to the community and for hiking and biking. And that we definitely saw a decrease in illegal use in the wilderness because of that strategy. So all of what you're saying as actions can be very effective. And it doesn't need to be super complicated, but really working with people and working with partners to make some of this stuff happen. And then seeing how it works over time and continuing to adapt. So the last element of the framework is basically do it. Implement actions, you know, who's in charge and who's responsible for a particular action. It's usually a whole team of people, but it requires some leadership. And then monitor and evaluate progress. This doesn't have to be really complicated. For the camping situation that I've been referencing, what we do is we just hold out in the field an annual, an after action review or a year-end evaluation with all of our volunteers and ask people for feedback. You know, here were our goals at the beginning of the summer. How did we do? What can we learn from this summer and how do we continue to make improvement for the following year? And do we need to adjust? So, and it's really important as you're entering this phase to celebrate your accomplishments and then figure out What can we adjust to do even better the next year? So when we think about defining success, it's not about making everybody happy. We, as public servants, we serve such a diverse audience, and everyone has, different opinions about what they want to see. And so we're not going to make everyone happy, but what we really try to ask ourselves is a couple things. Did we help resolve the problem, or did we, it may not have been perfect, but are we making progress? Did we create some kind of foundation that's going to improve the situation? Do we have an explicit rationale for the decisions that we made, and rationale for the choice, especially when we're choosing between actions? Why did we choose a particular course of action over another possibility? And then, is there, as we went through this process, is there really a commitment to move forward? Because planning and doing this work doesn't mean anything if there's no commitment to implementation. So build that throughout the your processes. And ultimately, in doing this and working with the public, did we create more trust and credibility that allows us to keep building goodwill and striving that we're all in this together? This is not, we have a responsibility as folks working for agencies to help facilitate the public dialogue and to be the leaders in addressing these issues, but we can't do it alone. It takes all of us working together, and creating that kind of community or partner-wide effort really does help yield results in the long run. So just some of the, a couple lessons that I wanted to share as we move into the questions here is again, change is inevitable, but realize that we do guide change by the actions that we take, and we do have the ability to influence where things are going. And I know, there's some folks that work in natural resources that really thought that they might be able to spend all their time out in the forest and in the mountains and not really have to deal with people. But unfortunately, this work is all about people, and building relationships is, if anything that we've learned, is that in order to solve some of these issues around visitor use, it really does involve building strong relationships with external folks that can help us deliver the message and help us move forward. And at least in my experience, that excuse me, there's usually some kind of common ground. And you can read, geez, I just lost my voice.
Hey, we can give you a minute, Linda,
Yeah.
and I'll just remind folks that if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in the chat box there, and I'll start gathering them up. Okay,
that would be great. So again, a couple of things that I tried to stress is definitely deeper problem analysis is needed. Really think through, what does success look like? Doesn't need to be complicated, but what are we really trying to achieve? It's oftentimes easier to say what we don't want. We have a harder time saying what we do want in the future. And one thing that we have learned is that scale is important. Is it's try to think not just solving a problem in one place, potentially having it pop up somewhere else, but look at that kind of more landscape approach. And are we really solving the problem long term, and getting at the root of what's going on there, and commit to action and robust monitoring with citizen engagement. And then as we move into the questions, there's a lot of great resources out there. I'm really impressed in this past year with so many virtual events. There's all kinds of really good webinars that have been recorded and posted. And the site that offers the visitor use management framework and a number of different documents and resources is this visitorUseManagement.mps.gov, and that's the 6 federal agencies. And so encourage you to visit that website. The Society of Outdoor Recreation Professionals has held a number of different webinars that are all recorded, and some good stuff. Of course, Wilderness Connect has a specific toolbox related to visitor use management. And then Utah State University has been holding these conservation conversations, and a number of really good webinars with practitioners that are recorded there. So, and there's also other resources available, but those are 4 that I wanted to specifically call out. So with that, any questions?
Hey, yeah, there's a couple of comments and questions in the chat box here. I guess I wanted to kick off one myself, if that's okay. And it's that you talked about selling the problem. And I think lately my experience has been that a certain group of individuals may see a problem, but potentially the decision maker, right, is under this pressure to continue to provide access, and they're always weighing the politics of shutting off access versus like the problem that's being presented to them and doing something. Any thoughts on like what has been a successful model to present that problem to that decision maker, and bring them along to see what maybe the specialists are seeing?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to, the communication and what is the story that we craft around why should we care? Is this a problem we're solving? And I think that we clearly, as we said at the beginning of this program, is we want to provide access. We want to connect people to places and things. At the same time, we can't kill the golden goose and things. And so what are the qualities of that place that are being impacted? And what are the consequences if we don't take action? And can we build a really compelling story about why this matters and why you should care? And I think that oftentimes that involves, is my experience, is for particularly tricky issues, is that it can't just come from the agency folks. It needs to come from some of our externals too, where they're seeing that same issue. The thing that the experience that I had, this last year, and obviously everyone was seeing it with just the explosion of particularly dispersed camping on the landscape over the last year, is that we presented a little webinar for the public at the end of the year, had some of our volunteers and ambassadors talking about their experiences and everything. And we had a number of people, it was a public webinar. And at the end, there was a lot of people that approached us in the community saying, I've seen these issues too, we want to help. What can I do to help? And it's when you start getting that kind of momentum, the conversation starts shifting.
I have a couple of comments from David Lyons on that, as well as just the general one. He says a good technique for deeper problem analysis is using the 5 whys. Keep asking why to ultimately arrive at the root cause rather than trying to address the symptom. And then he talks about reframing the problem to align with the key drivers for the decision maker. I'm not familiar with the 5 whys, that example myself. For you, Linda?
Yeah, David, I'd love for you to share that if you could, but the concept of, I'm sure people have heard about, keep peeling the onion, keep asking why, and try to go beyond the simple symptom to dig a little bit deeper. One of the things that I'll give you one example is alluded to, we have a pretty big issue with people leaving fires burning. And obviously, our fire prevention folks are like, geez, after all the Smokey Bear stuff and we still can't get people to put out their fires, why is this happening? And you start really looking, and the area where a lot of this was happening, there's no creek. And so what we learned in that was that people just weren't carrying extra water sufficient to put out their fire. And so one of the things that this woman Leslie did is all the places in town that sell bundled firewood, she put a sign right next to the firewood pile that said, do you have extra water? Pick up an extra thing of water before you go out, because you're going to need it in many of these places that don't have a water source on site. And we've also started putting QBs in a couple of our couple of areas for people to use as a water source to put fires out. But Dan, or David, if you want to add anything to that, please do.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a very simple technique, and exactly as it sounds, you just keep asking why, and then you come up with, one reason, and you keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And once you get to 5 whys, don't stop until you've done 5 whys.
Okay.
And you're going to arrive at a root cause, and then you address that, as opposed to keep addressing a root cause that will never solve, the problem.
Okay. So peel back at least 5 layers of the onion.
Get to the center of the onion. Exactly.
Excellent.
Great, thanks, David. And so that worked really good. I'm going to keep going through questions, but if you have a follow-up you want to discuss, we've given you all the ability to unmute yourself. I would welcome you to jump in on conversation. And so Meg Devine had asked, any tips for a good way to handle mountain bikers making so many social trails?
Gosh, what I found in working with mountain biking, the mountain biking community, is that it's really easy for folks on horseback or hikers to go cross country. Mountain biking generally requires a trail, and so there's been a lot of issues with basically illegal trail construction and building trails where they didn't exist before. And I think that what is key there is trying to work with that community and learn of are there truly, what's missing in the current trail system that is not providing the kind of experience that people are looking for, and trying to really understand that. And back in the early 2000s, we were seeing a lot of illegal trail construction, and we did start some one-on-one conversations with folks. We did a bunch of one-on-one interviews with people in the community, horseback riders, hikers, and mountain bikers, and saying, did we think, just to find out did people think that there was an opportunity to look at a particular area and even accommodate all those three different kinds of uses, that, or were people just going to come together and start screaming at each other? And what we learned in that was that people did think that there was the ability to accommodate those uses. And then we pulled everybody together and said, okay, what does a shared trail system look like in this area? And out of that, we actually ended up with some separated use trails and some trails that were just for hike and horse, a few trails that were downhill oriented that were only for mountain biking, and some shared use trails and things. But that came out of a bunch of facilitated conversations. And the thing that was interesting in that is it created a community of within the mountain biking world that they felt like the Forest Service actually listened to them and worked with them. And now if somebody tries to build an illegal trail in that area, they're basically they won't be given a shuttle ride up the road. They are ostracized by that group if they don't make sure that the system that we have is maintained and is well placed. So it takes time, but really try to listen to that group. Another tool that can be used is there's some really cool stuff coming out in the 10-year wilderness, 10-year trail challenge around doing trail assessments and really looking at ecological sustainability, social sustainability, and economic sustainability, and trying to understand what does a trail system look like in your area to meet the diverse interests that exist now. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to that one. Hope that helps.
Good. So I have another one from S.L. Hughes, and it says, so when does visitor education cross the line of the wilderness goal of self-discovery and challenging the individual to do the research and learn the skills and the behavior needed to have a good experience in any particular area? So balancing that, opportunity for self-discovery versus us spending a lot of time and energy on education, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think there's always going to be a little bit of a tension there, but I think there's a big difference between providing information about what opportunities exist versus providing information about when you do enter that area, what are the behaviors that are expected. And so I think that in order to provide that sense of discovery and mystique and self-reliance is particularly we probably don't want to be giving people too much information about on the opportunity side of exactly, as you come around this corner, here's what you're going to see and things. You don't want to be going to that level of detail, but I know that in some areas we've been very conscious to let people know that if you enter this particular wilderness, I'm thinking of the Grovant Wilderness, which is actually what's in this picture, is we don't have signs at many of our trail junctions. And there's also a tremendous number of animal created trails from elk and things like that. And so we consciously try to tell people that if you enter this area, you need to really know how to read a map, because the trail system can be difficult to navigate if you don't have a map and you haven't learned how to kind of read the landscape and things. And so be prepared for that before you enter this area. So I think it's those, you can still create some kind of self-discovery and self-reliance while creating good information of what the expectations are.
Good. So I'm going to combine two, I think it's a dialogue that's going on, but one, Nancy Kellogg says, how can we effectively educate the public before they get to the trails, especially in terms of preparedness and trash or leave no trace? And then Liz Lacey responded, multi-agency national messaging campaign, ? And so wondered if you had any thoughts on that before people get out there, the ability to educate.
Yeah, and again, I mentioned a few things, but I think that is the new world, and something that we're just diving into right now is really trying to engage, particularly our tourism boards and everything that reach a lot of people that are planning visits. Is, you know, I've got to hand it to the Park Service. Their websites do a really good job of, there's always a tab that says plan your visit and things. And we don't have that kind of a tab on many of our Forest Service websites. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're actually using partners to get some of those messages out, and working with the chamber and with the travel and tourism boards to really get that message of, you've got to plan ahead and prepare. And that's the #1 message that we're sharing across the board among multiple agencies. And we'll see if that starts to have an effect. But we've worked really hard over the past year to just create that partnership and have it come from the tourism industry as well as from the agency and the partners. I'd encourage, the thing that is cool is that this is happening in a lot of you know, Colorado's got a very active campaign around we need to take care of these wild spaces, and trying to put messages up on that. And Tahoe, the Lake Tahoe area, the Tahoe Cares, major campaign around that. And Sun Valley, Idaho, pretty cool campaign around that. And then Wyoming just started a pretty major campaign around that. And it's the tourism industries are starting to shift from promotion to, we need to do a better job of educating folks on what to expect. So again, that shift is just starting to happen. And so take advantage of it.
Hey, so there's not there's not any more questions. There's a comment from Victoria Allen, which I think is right on. Says, look beyond outdoor stores, meet with church groups and other groups at their spaces to discuss these issues. I think, boy, I think of the discussions we've had this morning already about engaging more diverse participants. And as we try to do that, those thoughts kind of tie in, right? Thinking about other ways to engage the public, especially as we get new visitors. And so I think that's spot on. I'm going to offer up, Linda, I was going to close this out, but wondered if you had any closing thoughts for the group before I do that.
No, I don't think so. I really, really appreciate everyone attending, and I hope that this provides a few thoughts of how to start tackling some of these issues. And it sounds like you already are doing many things, but I really would encourage we have an opportunity right now with the attention that outdoor recreation has and the importance of it across the board. And so take that opportunity and run with it.
All right, I agree. And so thank you, Linda.